Hello, everyone. I'm Brianna Mandelli, the FAA's Assistant Administrator for Communications. Thank you for joining us today for a major announcement regarding the FAA's proposed streamlined launch and reentry licensing requirements rule for the commercial space industry in the U.S. Don't let the complicated name of the proposed rule fool you. At its core, this effort is simple. We're cutting the red tape that has held this industry to the launch pad for far too long. That's a theme you'll hear throughout this entire event, starting with U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Elaine L. Chao and reinforced by FAA Administrator Steve Dickson, FAA Commercial Space Chief Wayne Monteith, and Mike French, who is with the Aerospace Industries Association. We're bringing today's announcement to you via Zoom and on the FAA's Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook live streams. Later, after Mike French speaks, we'll take questions from those of you on Zoom through the Q&A feature. With that, let's begin with a message from Secretary Chao.
President Mike Pence. I'm pleased to announce the new streamlined launch and reentry licensing requirements. This revised rule enhances safety, innovation, flexibility, and efficiency in the commercial space industry. Modernizing launch regulations enables the FAA to keep pace with a dramatic increase in the cadence and complexity of commercial space operations. The department is grateful to the National Space Council, headed up by Vice President Mike Pence, on this issue, and to the FAA for completing this rulemaking in record time. Everyone involved recognized that the regulations governing the rapidly growing commercial space sector were woefully out of date. They needed to be updated to ensure that the United States remains a world leader in the commercial space sector. The streamlined rule consolidates 4 separate regulations that apply to all types of launch vehicle operations. It applies performance-based licensing and safety requirements and eliminates prescriptive rules that restrict innovation. Other new provisions allow space launch operators to use a single license for multiple launches from multiple launch sites. The new regulations also promote enhanced collaboration among stakeholders and encourage existing operators and others to propose and implement design and operational solutions. This will better facilitate commercial space transportation while protecting national security and maintaining public safety. This new rule comes during a period of increased commercial space activity. In August 2020, the FAA supported more launches in 1 month than it did in all of 2010 and 2011, including 4 launches in just 4 days. We've seen the first launch of American astronauts into orbit aboard an American-built rocket since the end of the Space Shuttle program in 2011. And in the coming weeks, we're going to see the first FAA license is headed towards a record year in commercial space And our goal in finalizing this new regulation is to keep it that way. In fact, this tempo is expected to increase to about 100 flights per year in the near future. The department has taken other steps to boost commercial space operations as well. The FAA set up a spaceport office, which has licensed 12 spaceports and is looking at 6 more applicants. We also completed a reorganization of the FAA's Commercial Space Transportation Office to increase efficiency, effectiveness, and accountability. To summarize, the department's new launch and re-entry rule is a historic milestone. It will not only help unleash the creativity and energy of America's commercial space industry, it will also help ensure our country has access to the limitless resources of space that will create new industries and jobs here on Earth.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this stellar occasion, the liftoff of what we call SLR2, our new and improved commercial space rule. Now, with SLR2, which is officially known as the Streamline Launch and Reentry Licensing Requirements Final Rule, we're now poised to unleash even more innovation and imagination into the exploration of space. SLR2 supports the needs of this fast-moving industry while ensuring the safety of the public. And as you know, safety is always, and it has been and will be, the Department of Transportation and the FAA's North Star. I want to thank Secretary Chao for her opening comments, for her leadership, and for her support during the process of really what amounted to rebooting our entire commercial space operation at the FAA to successfully implement these types of rules. As the Secretary said, the old regulations were woefully out of date and really out of step. The industry told us that loud and clear. You see, 3 years ago, at the first meeting of the reconstituted National Space Council, SpaceX President and COO Gwen Shotwell described to us how it took heroics, which were her words, to navigate the labyrinth of FAA regulations and licensing process for launching the same rockets on 2 different launch pads out of the state of Florida. Doesn't seem like it should be that hard, does it? Well, input like Gwen's led to the National Space Council asking us to review and revise the existing commercial launch and reentry licensing requirements back in 2018. You asked for it and we responded. Along with Secretary Chao, I thank Wayne Monteith, our FAA Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation, and his hardworking crew for their tireless work in developing these innovative rules and seeing the effort through to the finish line. He had a great support structure that included the rulemaking office, several of our outstanding attorneys, and economists who worked with his team every step of the way. Great job. As Secretary Chao said, included in the new performance-based rules are provisions that will allow space launch operators to use a single license for multiple launches from multiple launch sites. That's one of the many examples of how SLR2 replaces cumbersome prescriptive requirements with flexible performance-based criteria. And it couldn't come at a better time. We're forecasting as many as 56 commercial launches and reentries next year, up from the mid-30s this year in 2020. The broad retooling of our commercial space infrastructure and regulations was essential to enable this growth. And it doesn't stop at 50-something operations per year, as the Secretary said. Once space tourism begins operating in earnest, we'll probably be topping 100 operations a year. So this all illustrates the power of collaboration between government and industry. It allows us to come up with win-win solutions that meet our mandate for safety and suit your need to innovate. If the operation is safe and meets the performance standards, we're seeing to it that commercial space operations can continue to provide limitless opportunities, really, for exploration while generating technological advancements in spacesuits, capsules, rockets, reentry operations, and elsewhere. And that's what we've always done in the U.S., continuously strive to be a leader in space. We're explorers, and we have an innate desire to know what's beyond the atmosphere and far out into the heavens. This new rule gives us the regulatory thrust to get there faster without sacrificing safety. You know, just days ago, I was reminded of the awesome new adventures that commercial space has given us recently. Elon Musk's Tesla Roadster just completed its first flyby of Mars. I imagined its spacesuited mannequin pilot, whom we know as Starman, behind the wheel, David Bowie music blasting on a state-of-the-art sound system. The Falcon Heavy launch vehicle that put Starman and his red electric convertible into a heliocentric orbit back in 2018 were beneficiaries of the commercialization of space, an endeavor started by President Ronald Reagan, actually, way back in 1982, and one that we're accelerating with new rules like SLR2. And while Starman certainly captures our imagination, a great deal of today's commercial space activity is much more down to earth when it comes to helping humanity and the human spirit. In late August, Rocket Lab orbited a synthetic aperture radar microsatellite that customers can use for on-demand security, agricultural, infrastructure monitoring, and disaster response and recovery efforts. And just last week, SpaceX launched yet another Falcon 9 booster with 60 more Starlink satellites, increasing the size of its space-based, high-speed global internet system constellation to more than 700 satellites, with hundreds more to come as they move toward operational readiness in the next year or so. And we're also on the verge of broad-scale space tourism and research flights with companies like Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin planning to offer regular suborbital operations in the very near future. And you can't help but get excited by the activity going on at the edge of the atmosphere and beyond these days. And I am very proud of the role that the FAA has in making it all happen and keeping it safe. Streamlined space operation rules like SLR2 are clearing the launch pad and getting rid of the red tape that used to hold back these bold explorers, moving all of us really light years closer to new worlds. And thank you all for joining us today.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is a very exciting day in the commercial space transportation industry. We have a new rule that continues to protect the public while allowing this industry to innovate and grow. Secretary Chao, Administrator Dixon, I want to personally thank you both for your leadership and unwavering support during this incredible rulemaking process. And to our Office of Commercial Space Transportation family, thank you for a phenomenal job in making this final rule a reality on a timeline that most believed to be impossible. I'd also like to thank our industry stakeholders for your honest and meaningful feedback during the rulemaking process. It shouldn't be lost on anyone that good rulemaking is a collaborative process, and without our industry and interagency partners, we could not have completed this task. Be it individual companies like United Launch Alliance and SpaceX, or organizations like the Commercial Spaceflight Federation and the Coalition for Deep Space Exploration. each representing many companies. We found your comment submissions to be very helpful, and I look forward to your continued success under this new rule. We carefully reviewed every single comment. However, as you can imagine, not every comment was incorporated, but we went to great lengths in the preamble to explain exactly why. The Streamlined Launch and Reentry Licensing Requirements Final Rule, or SLR2, is the foundation to modernizing access to and the return from space. It is the cornerstone to a 21st century licensing process. The goal is to simplify the licensing process and allow novel operations, reduce cost, and positioning both the industry and the FAA for the rapid increase in the number of launches that are coming, all without compromising safety. The rule reflects both the needs of the growing industry as well as the need to modernize how we regulate. The pace of launch and reentry operations has quickly been picking up. In fiscal year 2021, which in reality means the last 2 weeks, the FAA has already supported 3 licensed launches. That's the same number of launches that we supported in both fiscal year 2010 and fiscal year 2011. We're on tap for a record year, and there's ample reason to believe the numbers will only continue to climb. As Secretary Chao stated a few short weeks ago, in just one 4-day period, we supported as many FAA licensed launches as we did in all of 2010. Or stated another way, 4 launches in just 90 hours. Wow. This is our future, and this is just one reason why SLR2 is so important. The new rule is streamlined, it's flexible and agile, it facilitates innovation, it encourages much greater industry involvement in the licensing and safety process, it's transparent and reduces duplicative government requirements, and while it is laser focused on public safety, it only regulates to the extent necessary. With this new rule, we now have a set of flexible performance-based regulations as well as streamlined operational approvals. Bottom line, we're taking a new approach, but as I've already stated, with safety always as our top priority. So now I'd like to walk you through some of the highlights of the rule. Part 450 streamlines and combines the best elements of the launch and reentry regulations of parts 415, 417, 431, and 435 into a single performance-based part to better accommodate the evolving commercial space transportation industry. You've heard me and others say the regulation is performance-based and provides greater flexibility. But what does that actually mean? First, it means all applicants still need to meet safety and performance standards. But instead of the FAA dictating how to reach the target, an applicant or the industry now has the ability to develop their own ways and processes to reach that. The rule allows operators to request to have a means of compliance, or MOC, approved that will accommodate customized operations, changing technologies, and innovation. Once we approve these means, an applicant can use them repeatedly to meet regulatory requirements. A means of compliance table is available on the FAA website and will be updated as additional means of compliance are accepted by the FAA. MOCs may be government standards, industry consensus standards, or unique means developed by an individual applicant. An MOC may also be submitted to the FAA outside of the licensing process. Part 450 licenses are vehicle operator licenses, valid up to 5 years that authorize multiple operations at multiple sites, if applicable. The compliance period for legacy licenses is up to 5 years after the effective date of Part 50, which will be 90 days after it is published in the Federal Register. Legacy licenses may still be renewed and modified, but again, through the 5-year period. For applicants with an accepted license application at the time Part 450 becomes effective, the FAA will continue to process that license application under Parts 415, 417, 431, or 435, whichever is applicable. It relieves duplication for ground safety at certain federal launch and reentry sites. If an operator has contracted for ground safety services or oversight at the major federal ranges, it carves out neighboring operations personnel as a separate category of the public. This reduces the need to clear or evacuate neighboring personnel during a launch or reentry operation. The scope of a license removes the provision that regulatory oversight automatically starts at equipment arrival at the gate. Collision avoidance, or COLA, and critical asset protection are instituted for all operators upon the rule effective date. However, COLA and critical asset analysis will be performed by the government. It provides a method to determine if an expensive, highly reliable flight safety system is even required. It provides flexibility on many application submittal timelines. It provides regulatory certainty through incremental review of modular applications associated with the safety review. It's a streamlined process for seeking a safety element approval in conjunction with a vehicle operator license, and enables innovative concepts with flexibilities such as equivalent level of safety, application process alternatives agreed to by the administrator, and alternatives to flight safety analysis and flight abort based on demonstrated reliability. Now, those are just some of the highlights. The FAA is hosting a Part 450 workshop on November 4th through the 6th to walk through the rule in detail. This workshop will include an overview of the rule, with each topic under Part 450 taught by FAA's subject matter experts. It will also include sessions on crosswalk tools that compare Part 450 to legacy regulations. Due to the large number of expected participants will submit questions electronically, and the FAA will answer as many as possible with the remaining time at the end of each topic. The FAA will consider including any unanswered questions in a future frequently asked question file or training material. After the workshop, legacy operators will be invited to individual sessions to answer questions pertaining to their unique programs. Now, for both the FAA and the industry, there will be a learning period. Performance-based regulations require upfront work from both parties. This work will pay dividends in the future as companies continue to innovate and develop new technologies, processes, and procedures. This new regulation centers on public safety first, while allowing the growing US commercial space industry to innovate, expand, and continue to lead the world in the commercial space transportation sector. I'd again like to thank Secretary Chao, Administrator Dixon, the AST team, and the industry for their support to bring this rule to fruition. With that, I'd like to turn the mic over to our AST Deputy Associate Administrator, Kelvin Coleman, to introduce our next speaker. Again, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Wayne. I first would like to add my voice to that of Secretary Chao, Administrator Dixon, and yours, Wayne, in congratulating and thanking our FAA family extended, the industry, as well as our US government partners on this significant achievement in putting forth our SLR2 historic rulemaking. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Mike French. Mike serves as the Vice President for Space Systems at the Aerospace Industries Association, where he advocates for policies, regulations, and investments that ensure American leadership and strong industry partnership across the civil, commercial, and national security sectors. He also has previously served as a Senior Vice President for Commercial Space at Bryce Space and Technology, a leading market analysis and management consulting firm, as well as the Chief of Staff at NASA, where he advised the NASA administrator, the White House, and other senior government leadership on national space policies. We've seen significant growth over the last decade in commercial space transportation. And Mike, we welcome you to share your perspectives on the future prospects of commercial space and how the new SLR2 rule will play a role in enabling that future. Mike, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Calvin. And thank you to the department and for FAA for allowing me to join today and for your continued work with industry. I think it's important to note the dual role of AST. AST is responsible for regulating the U.S. commercial transportation industry, but also has a responsibility to encourage, facilitate, and promote commercial space launches. AST deserves a lot of credit for taking both of these roles seriously, which requires close collaboration with industry, which you all do and have done quite a great job of. Let's talk about this rule making specifically. Why is this so important, to U.S. industry and maintaining global competitiveness? Well, let's take a look at some of the numbers, that I think about when I think about this rule. First of all, the current rule structure is based on a set of rules that was mostly developed in the 1990s, with the last significant update in 2006. In space terms, 2006 is when New Horizons was just leaving for Pluto, to give you a sense of perspective there. Since that time, we've obviously seen quite a growth in the commercial space industry. By way of numbers, in 2014, the FAA was actively communicating on a regulatory front with 14 firms, 14. Last year, that number was 65, just to give a sense of the growth in just 5 years. Another really important aspect driving this rulemaking is that we've had new models and markets that with expanded use of reusability, as well as growth in suborbital tourism, and spaceports, commercial spaceports. The existing rules view expendable and reusable under separate frameworks, and since 2006, that has obviously been blurred when we look at market offerings. We've also seen a significant increase in FAA license launches. And I'll note that this is driven both by commercial customers buying FAA license launches, but also by government customers purchasing FAA license launches. I'll share some recent analysis from Bryce Space and Technology. In 2006, the last time there's a significant change in the regs, 11% of launches were FAA licensed. In each of the last 4 years, 2017 till 2020, 70% or more of US launches have been FAA licensed. Obviously an incredible growth in that period of time. And this trend is expected to continue. If we just look at government FAA license launches, we expect over 120 ISS launches that will be FAA licensed just in the next decade. Again, underline the importance of looking at these regs and updating them. Despite the need for these changes, I think it's really important to highlight something that's important both to industry but obviously the FAA's mission, which is the importance of public safety. That's something we certainly as industry remember when we're thinking about this, and obviously something that is a core principle in any regulatory changes. So when we look at what changes industry has been commenting on, I want to first say I have not yet fully reviewed the new regulations, and so we'll be spending obviously the coming weeks here doing that deep dive, and very much appreciate the stakeholder meetings that General Monteith said will be coming, and a chance, a further opportunity to interact with FAA. But some of the things that we are looking for, have been looking for, are in the areas where General Monteith touched on. Those include the establishment of a performance-based framework. It includes adopting a single license structure to accommodate a variety of launch vehicle types and operations and launch and reentry sites. Those comments include allowing for coordinated determinations of applicable regulations and being able to work through the pre-application process in new ways. And then finally, looking to see guidance documents to facilitate frequent updates. Again, items that General Monteith touched on, but we'll be reviewing more in depth and looking forward to working with AST as we review those regs. And so what's next? The first thing we'll obviously do, as I mentioned, is reviewing the rule and the advisory circulars. Second, participating in the stakeholder workshops, which we hope will provide a good initial feedback to AST. The AST has an outside advisory board, the ComStack, And the ComStack has made some recommendations to stand up a rulemaking committee that would help AST in looking at the current rules that were just put out and building upon them, both highlighting any immediate changes that might be required, as well as providing comment and feedback on the advisory circulars. Beyond that, we look forward to building a consensus for any changes down the road after that review. So with that, I thank you very much for the time, and I'll pass it back to you, Calvin.
Thank you very much to all of our guest speakers today. This is certainly an exciting time for commercial space and innovation. With that, we're now going to take some questions from our Zoom participants. The first question is a great segue after Mike French's comments via stakeholders, and it says, what steps will the FAA take to ensure stakeholders understand all the features of the new rule?
Thanks, Brent. Great question. As I stated, we are planning to have a industry workshop from the 4th to the 6th of November. I think that's going to be a great opportunity to really walk industry through what this rule looks like and what it means not only to industry writ large, but to the industry or the individual stakeholders. As we will be setting aside time to walk them through exactly what this means for them and their current operations. We also have a plan to what we call crosswalk and say, if you're a 417 operator operating under the expendable launch vehicle rule, we will show you how everything that you've done under 417 translates to new Part 450. So in essence, we'll be doing a lot of the work for you to really show you the benefits of transitioning to Part 450 as early as you can.
Great. Another question from our participants are, will there be grandfathering for existing licensees or companies in pre-application consultation?
Another great question, Bree. Appreciate it. There will be a transition period for existing licensees. And so right now, as we said up front, the plan is that this rule will go effective or become effective 90 days after it's published in the Federal Register. Because we have a couple of companies that are very, very deep into the pre-application process, we are also extending that period, effectivity period, essentially, for an additional 90 days. We believe at that point, any of the companies that are, like I said, very deep into this process will be able to get through a completed application, submit that to us, and then they can continue up to the 5-year event horizon that the rules can remain effective, the current rules, 415, 417, 431, 435, that 5-year period from the effective date. So we've taken a hard look at that, and we want to make sure that we don't disadvantage any single stakeholder because of a date that we have chosen.
Great. Wayne, can you speak a little bit about why the FAA chose not to put out an SNRM rather than instead of a final rule?
I can. So there was a lot of discussion, particularly during the comment period, when industry had an opportunity to review the notice of proposed rulemaking. And one of the requests was to do an SNRM and essentially kind of start over again to allow more industry engagement. Well, we believe that with the comments that we were receiving from industry, we did not need to go with a supplemental rule making effort, and instead would put all of our energy into maximizing the performance-based nature of this rule. So we looked at every single comment that came in. We adjudicated every single comment that came in. We worked diligently with our interagency partners. And I think that once industry gets really gets a chance to look at this new rule, which is starting about 34 minutes ago, they will see that it is substantially different from the notice of proposed rulemaking. Now, everything has a tie either to that original rulemaking or the changes, either to the original rulemaking or to comments. And I think you're going to find that this is a better rule. It really does support greater innovation, flexibility, efficiency, and lays the foundation for us in the FAA to keep pace with this dramatic increase in cadence and complexity that we're seeing in the commercial space transportation sector. Short answer to a very long response is we need this new rule. We need this rule to get us going forward. We've seen a 10-fold, 20-fold, 30-fold increase in the number of launches. And quite frankly, it'd be inappropriate for us to increase our staff 10, 20, 30 times to do this. This rule is foundational to us being able to support this industry while continuing to protect the public.
Fantastic. Can you give a couple of examples of the differences between the draft and final rule based on the comments that the FAA received?
For example, so in the initial rule, we talked about collision avoidance and we talked about critical asset protection. There were a couple of consistent themes on the comments. Number one, a lack of understanding on why those things were important. And number two, a lack of understanding on how they were going to be implemented. So why they're important, again, it brings commonality between FAA licensed launches and launches where the bulk of our other launches occur on the federal ranges. So for instance, on collision avoidance, on our current regulations, and oh, by the way, collision avoidance and commercial or critical asset protection requirements become effective on the date of the effective date of the rule. On our current rules, you have to avoid essentially human-rated objects in space. So think prior space shuttle or the International Space Station. Whereas on the federal range, you also have to avoid other satellites, rocket bodies, things that you could collide with and cause debris. This brings us in line with that. Critical assets, if you're launching, say, from Launch Complex 40 and on Launch Complex 41 out of Cape Canaveral, there's a $1 billion satellite, you would expect us to protect that to a higher level. We are now consistent and transparent with our stakeholders that those assets, if so deemed critical by the Department of Defense, they will be protected. But the good news is we also listened to industry when they said, hey, we don't even know how we can calculate this because some of this information is classified. We completely agreed. And that is why either we or the Department of Defense, in this case, essentially a US government agency, will do those calculations for industry.
Follow up to that question. Some parts of the NPRM were very prescriptive. Has that changed in the final rule?
It's a great question as well, because quite frankly, they seem very prescriptive to me too. And yes, we heard industry loud and clear. We took parts that were prescriptive. We made them far more performance-based. And in many cases, what we did was we shifted some of the prescriptive nature into an advisory circular. Now, advisory circular is not regulatory in and of itself, but it is a means to satisfy a safety requirement. And it is only one means. If industry comes up with a better means that we can accept and all agree on, then that becomes a means. But what this does is give industry, at least right out of the starting gate, at least one way to accomplish the requirement. Flight safety analysis is a good example. In the final rule, we retain sections for each of the required component analyses, but remove the prescriptive detailed requirements and replace them with more performance-based language. That detailed information on how to conduct the analysis is now in an advisory circular. So I think it's a win-win for all of us. The other great thing about advisory circulars is they're almost like living documents and much easier to modify. So with this rule, we've also published our first 3 advisory circulars, and we'll be asking industry to come back to us within the next 30 days if they see a way to improve these, so that we can review that, work with them, and if the advisory circulars need to be modified, we'll have time to do that before that the rule becomes effective at publishing plus 90 days.
Wayne, you're reading our participants' minds. The next question is, will the FAA have a full body of advisory circulars published with the rule?
Unfortunately, no. Right now, we're planning on approximately 27 advisory circulars. Now, keep in mind, some advisory circulars are a way to accomplish a requirement. Other advisory circulars are simply guidelines on how to they codify a process. But we do have a logical plan laid out that sequences these advisory circulars from the ones that we consider most critical as the rule is incorporated. So for instance, the first 3 that went out deal with high consequence protection, high fidelity flight safety analysis, and computing systems and software. Those that we really got the bulk of the feedback on, those sections that we got the bulk of the feedback on during the comment period. Now, after that, like I said, we lay everything else. Our goal is to have all advisory circulars published by the end of this fiscal year.
Great. Another participant has asked if there is a target date for publishing Part 450. Is that available before publishing?
So as of 41 minutes ago now, Part 450 has been posted to the FAA website. The rule cleared the Office of Management and Budget on the 30th of September, and we have transferred that rule over to the Office of the Federal Register. It'd be inappropriate for me to try to estimate their timeline. It's got to be sequenced in with all the other work that they do. And that's why we're posting the rule today. And the rule will be identical to what you'll see in the office or in the Federal Register when it's actually published. And so between now and November 4th, industry, we hope you spend time doing a deep dive, as Mike French said, into this new rule, those advisory circulars, so that we can have a very robust and open discussion on the 4th to 6th of November.
Great. Will we be seeing updates to the FAA USAF MOA to create greater reciprocity between the 2 entities? And if so, when do you expect that to happen?
Absolutely. So this is part of our drive to eliminate duplicative requirements. As we mentioned, in Part 450, we have a provision for us to accept ground safety designations at the federal ranges, at certain federal ranges, by NASA and the Department of Defense. So that takes us essentially out of the ground safety business, but not completely out of the ground safety business, because it's important to understand that we're still responsible for ground safety. And so that's for 450. In conjunction with that, we're very close to publishing a ground safety policy that will also incorporate that concept into our current regulations, so that we have consistency between the 2 regulations. What the memorandum of understanding will do between the Department of Transportation and the Department of Defense is codify the processes by which we can accept that, those designations by another federal agency. As we are planning right now for a commercially licensed launch operation, at certain federal ranges, right now being the Eastern Range and Western Range, Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg, we will accept DoD ground safety designations. And the MOA is also working towards the DoD accepting FAA flight safety analysis. So again, we remove those duplicative requirements. As far as timing, I don't have a great answer for you on timing. These things are important to get exactly right. And the delay has been publishing 450 and getting the ground safety policy approved.
Fantastic. Does the launch still begin with the arrival at the gate?
Maybe. And so this is interesting. In my last job as the director of the Eastern Range at Cape Canaveral, I can tell you this was one of the things that made me scratch my head often, that for instance, a booster could be shipped across country and the license didn't kick in until it hit the gate at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, arguably the safest part of the journey. And that's when scrutiny became the greatest. So now we put in a provision that during the pre-application process, an individual company can, in essence, negotiate with us when they want the license to begin. And my assumption is that it will begin much more proximate to launch and absolutely more proximate to hazardous operations. So if you want it to begin earlier, we can certainly begin it earlier. But if you want it to begin later in the process, we will work with you to determine the most appropriate time. Because if we can get to much more proximate to launch or to hazardous operations where the public may be endangered, it reduces burden on the individual stakeholder, and it certainly reduces burden on government to monitor operations that have little to no impact on public safety.
Great. Who's going to perform the risk analysis for critical assets?
So once again, as I mentioned earlier, we have heard industry's feedback on this because a lot of this analysis is built on a classified database. They recognized that there was some work they could not do, and it would be burdensome. So we have made a decision working with the Department of Defense that the federal government, either us or the federal range, will conduct that analysis required to protect critical assets. And again, critical asset protection is an important component of the rule so that we don't duplicate requirements with the federal range. And if you happen to be a launch operator who launches commercial payloads and government payloads, to the greatest extent practicable, we want your requirements to be the same from a safety perspective.
Great. I know industry has raised many questions on how neighboring operations personnel would work. Can you give a summary of how they were resolved in the final rule?
Well, the good news is we're going to be much more consistent again with how the Department of Defense does this. And we are working towards a minimal disruption to operations that are going on in adjacent locations. Again, I'll come back to the analogy with Launch Complex 40 and 41 at Cape Canaveral, I think just over a mile apart. And so if you're launching off one, you potentially have to evacuate the other because we treated even government personnel as members of just the general public. So we're now modifying that. And so those workers will be treated as government, essentially government public, so that in most cases they can continue working. So the site operator will actually determine who can be designated as a neighboring operator or neighboring operations personnel in coordination with the operators at that site. Now, it's important to keep in mind that we're looking for folks that are falling under that designation to actually have a need to be on site at the time. They're performing a function, they're processing a payload, they're keeping a rocket safe or payload safe. They've got some kind of function that requires them to be there. This is not to allow an adjacent site to set up bleachers and bring people in and provide them hot dogs and a close view of a launch. It's not that at all. This is actually to be able to keep operations going. And so, like I said, these folks will be designated by the range. We'll make sure they're protected to the same level as all government personnel. And I am confident that this will minimize to the greatest extent that we can any disruption to other operations, which become incredibly important when you see launch cadences of 50, 75 to 100 launches a year out of Cape Canaveral Kennedy Space Center alone.
Will there be a limit on the applicability of this rule to different launch sites, or is this intended to be applicable at most major launch sites within the US?
Right now, it's really geared towards, now it can be applied in other places, but it's really geared towards those federal ranges where we know you've got very close operations occurring. And again, because of the cadence, if this was one launch, 2 launches a year, it's really not significantly disruptive. But when you're, 20, 30, 50, like I said, 100 launches, now it's also important to keep in mind, if you're launching, say 40 times a year, when I left the Eastern Range, the average number of launch attempts to get off the range was about 2.5. So if you're looking at 40 launches, you're really looking at almost 100 attempts. So 100 days out of the year, that can be exceptionally disruptive to other operations. And so that's really where we focus our effort.
Great. Does the new rule eliminate duplicative requirements when launching from a federal range?
It reduces to the maximum extent that we could duplicative requirements. We have, there may be some we haven't identified yet, but the biggest one that we identified was the ground safety. And that one we tackled head on. And like I mentioned earlier, as part of the memorandum of agreement with the Department of Defense, we are now working on flight safety analysis as well. If we determine that there are other duplicative requirements that are ripe for elimination or modification, we will absolutely tackle that. There is no reason for industry to have to complete 2 completely different processes to accomplish the same goal. And we recognize that. And so not only is this good for industry, us reducing and or eliminating duplicative processes, but quite frankly, it's also good governance.
Great. Industry was very vocal that they didn't agree with the conditional expected casualties. Did the final rule adjust that or eliminate it?
It did. And I'll tell you, this is another one of those areas we heard them loud and clear. And as we published this in the NPRM, it was not, be careful how I say this, there was still work to do on the final product of CEC. Now, over the course of since we published back in April of last year, April 15th of last year, we have worked extensively, particularly with the Common Standards Working Group and the Department of Defense, to really finalize this. And so, again, I'd really like to say to industry, thank you. We put a great deal of time and energy into this, as did industry, and their feedback was invaluable. So we have revised the rule, and based on the comments we received, we've also agreed to allow other methods besides CEC to protect against these high consequence events. And we've also have relief built in for vehicles that have demonstrated reliability. For example, air launch systems that use a carrier aircraft. But because conditional risk is a good measure to protect against a high consequence event, we have also kept it as one way to measure. We think that, part of the problem was we were not articulate enough in how we described it. And, from my perspective, when I look at CEC and CEC calculations, probably the greatest benefit of this is for a company to determine if they even need a highly reliable flight safety system. Today, you just need one because you need one. But in reality, you don't always need one. And this is going to, I think, really benefit industry from reducing non-recurring engineering costs and, quite frankly, hardware costs going forward. If they can demonstrate that they don't even need a flight safety system, or a flight safety system that is essentially the gold standard, where you would fly in an area where you have population centers nearby.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have left for questions. Thank you so much for being so comprehensive, and to all of our participants who submitted questions, thank you very much. Please join me in a virtual round of applause for all of our guests who participated today. And thank you again for tuning in for this session.
Thanks, Bree.